on, Shadow Corner fam? It's your friendly neighborhood life coach, Cyan Gates. I am so excited to be back after my, I would say it has been a couple days break, maybe a week. I am well rested and I'm very excited to be here with you. But welcome back to another transformative episode of Shadow Corner. You know, we're all about embracing shadows and rewriting narratives and stepping into the most aligned and unapologetic version of ourselves. Now, this by far, I would say, is going to be my favorite episode because this is something that I've personally preached for a while. And it's also one of the core factors of Shadow Corner in itself. When we talk about what goes on with us and when we talk about exactly the shadows that we hide or the shadows that follow us, the number one thing that we look at is the story. Where in bits and pieces of you did you lose yourself on the way? What are some things that you thought were unforgivable or shameful or even not of you that you felt like you had to hide from yourself in order to be able to function in today's society? Now, the big core thing of Shadow Corner is that we talk about roots. Roots run deep when it comes down to your personal life, when it comes down to how you function and all the above. But when have you ever had an opportunity to meet with a real oracle that can tell you about how your story not only impacts, but how it can change you and weave the life that you want? Well, my guest today, her name is Amanda Johnson. Now, I will give her the proper introduction so that way I'm not just rambling here. So we're going to get right on to it. Amanda Johnson, also known as the Story Oracle, has spent the last 25 years alchemizing transformative experiences through her story literacy, writing, and narrative medicine. Her mission is to equip individuals with the humanity's most innate tool, story, writing, and community, to transmute the pain of their past into a more magical and ever after for themselves and those they serve. Through her story, with Saved by Story, Amanda partnered with helping professionals, creatives, coaches, CEOs, you name it, even your parents, guiding them to break free from limiting story loops and co-author a truer, more empowered narrative. She doesn't just help people write books. She helped them rewrite themselves. And she walks this path before herself, navigating a depth of her personal transformation from stepping into motherhood while losing her religious footing to uncovering unconscious narratives that kept her small, to working with a teacher from The Secret and realizing that her true gift wasn't just supporting the message, but walking the messengers back home to themselves. Today, we're going to dive into the power of storytelling. And I want you guys to really pay attention to this. This, like I said, this is the core, the meat and potato of Shadow Corner. Your story is your power. So, without further ado, I'm gonna stop my rambling because I can do this all day. Welcome, Miss Amanda. Hey, Miss Amanda, how you doing?
You. I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So, tell us about yourself and how. I know I glazed over in the introduction, but tell us a little bit about why you do what you do and why is storytelling so important.
Well, I have to tell my own story. So, when I went to the university, I was leaving a very religious community and school and experience. and going into another one actually, but it was going to be very different. I was invited into the honors program. I was going to be a journalist, tell stories. I loved writing, and I was going to tell everyone else's story. Got into the classic books program and realized that stories shape us, and they shape our culture and our civilizations. And so I had this opportunity to really wrestle with some of the biggest stories that underpin, especially Western civilization, a little bit Eastern, but it was a powerful experience because I learned the importance of context. I learned the importance of not just what someone was saying, but why they were saying it. What was motivating them? What was the story, the setting that they were living in, and the story that they were witnessing, and what were they reporting, and how did that shape what they were trying to put out for the next generation? And so I really realized the power of the context and the history. I decided to become a history teacher. Went to get my teaching credential, got into the system. And I don't know if this happens where you are, but um, I was put into the toughest classroom. Like, hey, newbie teacher, how about this classroom with the toughest kids who every other teacher has pushed into this one classroom? And story became our lifeline together. I was trying to figure out how to connect with them and motivate them and create vision when they didn't have it. I mean, they were living in one of the worst neighborhoods, dealing with gangs, and I had my little drug dealing teenager in the classroom lighting up joints. It was one of these experiences. Dangerous Mind. No, not Dangerous Minds. Remember the Freedom Writers, I think, right? When she stepped into that classroom and completely changed it. That's what I wanted to be, but actually I wasn't healthy enough physically or emotionally because I didn't realize the amount of story and shadow that had piled up for me. And I had this little boy at home that I was like determined not to mess up. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to focus on him, become a writing instructor for a family friend who was building this incredible company, and had the opportunity to go work with her, help people, took all that technical writing prowess that I developed when I was at the university and really help people to start thinking as they were writing and developing more persuasive um, articles and passing tests. And then we went to shop that, and I learned my first entrepreneurial lesson: know your market. We went to the wrong market, but maybe it was the divinely perfect market. That's probably how I would say it. We went to entrepreneurs who said, "We don't really want to learn how to write well. We don't need you to teach us that. We would like for you to fix what we've already written, manuscripts and websites and brochures and articles and all these things that weren't getting them the engagement that they wanted." And so I opened up this little editing business. And after a few years of that, I realized, you know what? I really need to help these people from the beginning because they are pouring so much time and energy. They're stealing from these different corners of their lives to try to get this project done. And it's hard. And then they bring it to someone like me after digging up all of their courage. And they realize, you know what? It's still not doing what they want it to do. And so, they have to go through the process with me of rehashing it and reorganizing and all of that. So I thought I'll just start from the beginning. And so, for the last 15 plus years, I've been helping individuals from the beginning. And what I realized very quickly, I'd had the opportunity to work with the teacher from The Secret who did a lot of transformative work. And I got to play in those rooms for many years and do some of my own storytelling, realize the power of telling stories in safe spaces. But when we got to the point where it was about, why do you care about this message that you want to put into the world? I mean, I had some individuals say things like, I'm tired of saying the same thing over and over again. I want to put this in a book and like hand it out before I talk to people, right? Like, but that was so rare. What usually happened was people went sheet white and realized that it was their story that was compelling them to write, that they hadn't they hadn't always been where they were now, that they wanted to celebrate and tell people how they got there. they had been in a rough spot before and weren't sure that they wanted to tell that story. And so began my journey of learning how to interact with other people's shadows as they were putting their messages on pages and stages.
So you call it story saving through storytelling.
Mhm.
You broke it down perfectly. But how does the story actually help people heal and transform themselves? Because like I know that part of like shadow work, one of the things you usually tell people to do is journal because
Mhm.
it helps you to recognize a lot of the idiosyncrasies, the syncrasies in your
Yeah.
writing in order for you to understand exactly who you are now versus the person that you're becoming. So
Mhm.
can you share a little bit
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, so like I said, I spent 3 years in, transformational rooms run by some of the most powerful facilitators who used their story to open up the room, right? To build trust and create safety and allow people to really sink in and tell their own stories. And that was remarkably freeing in the sense of some of those stories that had shadows um, attached to them for me. Like that was the first space that I told those stories. And when I received, um, compassion instead of judgment or someone just getting up and running out of the room, which I half expected them to do, I realized that, the most powerful element of storytelling is that human to human connection, right? Where we realize sometimes for the first time that we're not alone. Our details might be different, our settings, the stories that shaped us, the people who shaped us. But at the end of the day, stories allow us to really connect with other individuals and realize that we're really all in this together. We got to figure it out. And so I spent 3 years in that verbal storytelling space, and it was really powerful. But there was something that happened that was this bold shift when I started to ask people to write. Because what I would do is say, okay, we've kind of organized the content, right? We went through that verbal storytelling place where I could kind of see the arc of their narrative and help them to organize it and figure it out. And now was time to write that scene, and not just to write it as, this is what happened to me in this particular moment, but to write it from inside the moment, to be the character inside of that space. What were you, what was around you? Where were you? What did it feel like in your body? What were you thinking? What were you thinking in your mind? What was going on for you that you were having such this huge experience? And really, what ended up happening in that scene work was people would inevitably find details that they had forgotten, right? Because oftentimes these scenes, like you were saying earlier, we have these moments, and sometimes because of our age, sometimes just because of the strength of our nervous system or lack thereof, or because we're actually in real danger, we push details out of our conscious mind. And where do they go? Mm, I tend to think that they get stuck in our bodies. They get stuck in and begin to create those shadowy, dark places that end up turning into some sort of um, dis-ease, right? Sometimes emotionally, sometimes eventually physically, which is what was happening to me in my 20s. And so that ability to go back and really explore a scene, I feel, is the opportunity to go back and pull those little details out of the places where they have been stored and pull them into the light and say, okay, now I can see this whole picture a little better. And sometimes we find that things didn't happen exactly as we remember them. Sometimes there's a detail in there that blows our mind. And so for me, that's the real power of going into the character and really writing, because you get that opportunity to find things that have been pushed outside of your conscious awareness. And sometimes it's because it's just too painful and you need to be in a space of enough safety to go back there and work through it again. And sometimes it's because I think we just don't want to take responsibility for some of that crap. And if we pulled it up and looked at it, we'd be like, oh my gosh. And in every single scene that looks like this, I'm the one who's walking out of the room. How did that happen? Right? We like skip over these details that kind of remove our responsibility because we want to make it everyone else's. So
And I think that's the
yeah.
part of that's the biggest part of shadow work that is heavy, because it's like you can't believe you yourself did that or you went through that. Or then it starts
Mhm.
to get to a point where you start to ask your questions like, was I strong enough in the first place? Was I high? Was I? And it's like you start asking these giggly questions because you're like you can't believe what happened or anything else.
Yeah.
So how does shadow work connect with storytelling? Can facing our shadows craft our most authentic stories? Like stories from our past, can they propel us forward? I know that they can propel us forward, but where do you start? How do they connect with storytelling?
Yeah, I think that they do compel us. I had a very interesting experience just a few years ago. I was working on a client project and it was one of these unusual projects. Someone comes in and says, I need to do this in 6 months. And oh, by the way, it's probably going to be 1,500 pages long, which means I'm like putting my running shoes on, up early in the morning, immersed in this story. And, when you get really immersed in a story, like think of your favorite Netflix binge, your favorite series or that movie series that you really should go to bed, but you just keep letting it loop to the next one. Like
Bridgerton.
that's what I was experiencing. And why? Because we're so immersed in that world, right? It's some people say, oh, we do it for escape, but I happen to think that we do it because there's some medicine in there, right? There's something that's really speaking to our soul. And if we were paying attention and kind of knew some of the narrative tools that are being used, we would be able to get some really good medicine out of it. And so I was doing that with this client, second language learner, tough, uh, tough with the structure. It's like a really well spoken English, but when you write it, it's a little bit different. So I was fixing some stuff up and then enhancing story details. And I had this one experience where I was in a scene and all of a sudden it was like a scene from my childhood transposed itself over this scene. It's a very wild and crazy experience. But I was like, there was a son, a father, and a mother in the scene. And then I was sitting at a table with my dad and my grandmother when I was 7. And what happened as I was working through all of those details was I had just a question pop through of like, what if, we always say this when especially
Mhm.
when we're doing shadow work, well, they did the best that they could with what they had, right? Like, have you, right? And we kind of know that. And I would say that I knew that about these characters in my life. And I even had really good stories for them, you know. But there was this moment where I saw it differently. Like I saw another potential motivation that I hadn't considered before. And it opened up a space for knowledge, um, curiosity, compassion, and something to
Mhm.
be different than what I had always thought it would be. And so I think, as it relates to working through those stories and storytelling and also just story experiencing, right? Like just story immersion gives us the opportunity to really see parts of our stories that we couldn't have seen before by ourselves. I'm just sitting here alone in my setting with my regular characters, but when my space gets disrupted with someone else's story and it calls all of that content up for me, all that resistance or anger or wonderment, like that causes me to lean in and dig a little bit deeper for why am I feeling this way in response to that.
Okay. So I know you also talked to your mommy journey is very powerful.
Mm,
And I commend you. Everyone that is a mother, You have the biggest crown on you that no person can take from you. Like you have eyes in the back of your head. I'm still trying to figure out my mom's on. So you found out you were pregnant right after losing the religious footing. How
Yeah,
did storytelling help you navigate that transformative mode? Because I know that's a life changing event, and
it
you're
really
able to
is.
help people to get to that point. But your story is the most important as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it was a wild experience because as I held him and kind of had this feeling like he knew more than I did. I don't know if you've ever held a baby and felt like that. Like there's just so much more connected to something that I felt so disconnected from. And I had this really strong sense that all I needed to do was protect him. Like he was here on purpose. He knew who he was going to become, and I just needed to make sure that like he stayed intact, right? Which is how I didn't feel. But because I hadn't really experienced that before, I was trying to figure out how do I preserve his, help to cultivate a healthy self-image for him? Well, I used all my psychology and all the child development, all the stuff that I did at the university, right? To create more
Right.
empowering messages and scripts for him for his story, right? And better interactions. Like how could I
Mhm.
discipline in a healthier fashion, let's say. But the main thing for me was around his agency because I really felt like that had been I don't want to say stolen because it wasn't like it was intentional, but like I hadn't been given agency over what I was going to think and believe about the most important things because it had all come through the dogma of the setting that I was in. And so I thought, I really want to reserve that. Number one, because I'm not 100% sure what I believe, but most importantly, because I really want him to not have that, like, this is the way the world works. And then the huge question when he's 18 and have it all blown apart, which was how I felt, right? Because I hadn't really owned that. I hadn't really wrestled with the ideas. And is this true? Is this not true? What are the consequences if it is? And so I was struggling with that piece, like, how do I develop this critical thinking and this character and that social emotional literacy, right? That's a big term right now in education. Like, how do I help him stay connected to his feelings and own them and be a responsible, happy human being? And so, I had asked all of our family to not to try to hold back with the evangelizing that was happening pretty consistently. Like, let's preserve his mind and his heart. But one night he came home and he said, "Where's our Bible? Why don't we have one?" And I thought, man, they did it again. And he's like 3
But
or
did they
4,
actually like mention a Bible, or
You're
he was
right.
just
Like,
very
no,
curious?
it just he just came home from one of their houses, and apparently they'd have had a conversation about the Bible. And so before I could kind of before I could lose my temper, because I was just like, again, my husband jumped in. He said, the Bible right now is Avatar: The Last Airbender, which was a Nickelodeon cartoon that we were watching. I don't know if you've seen it. But this was like one of the most profound stories that we had watched, especially in cartoon form. We couldn't believe what we were watching. And I thought, oh my God, this is the smartest thing ever. Thank you, husband. This is brilliant. Because I have just spent 4.5 years learning how to do this, how to wrestle with big stories, how to pull out their most important themes, how to look for the universal truths, how to learn from story so that I don't have to learn the hardest lessons in my own life. And so that turned our living room into a classroom. And I started to use story with him very, very intentionally to help him, develop critical thinking. Like, let's make predictions. What do you think? Look for the patterns in stories. But what I didn't realize until he was 17, maybe a little bit earlier, but 17, we had this conversation that just blew my mind. I picked him up from school one day and he said, so I had this very strange experience in my class today. It was a science class, and she was talking about technology and how by the time I'm your age, he says, I might be able to choose immortality. And I said, would you? Like, this is one of the debates that we would have on the couch while watching, one of the stories about this. And he said, no, no, no. I wouldn't. And so I played devil's advocate. Well, is it because of where we live? Is it because of the people you're around? Is it because the world kind of looks like it's going to hell in a handbasket? Is it, all of
The
these
world is on
things? And
fire.
he said, no, it's because what have we learned from stories? We have learned that stories happen in time. There's a start and a finish. And the finish makes the story more meaningful, right? He was telling me that all of these stories that we had watched had helped to shape his moral compass. That at 17 years old, he knew that choosing immortality would be a bad idea. Like, who does that at 17? Except someone who has been, allowed the opportunity to walk millions of miles in other characters' shoes with someone sitting next to him saying, I don't know, would you do that? I don't know, would I do that? Right? And we would just like wrestle with it to the point that in the moment that he needed to have an answer, he had it. And he had, lots of evidence to support it.
Okay, so your
Oh,
son
I'm not
sounds
hearing
like
you.
the
Are you muted?
wisest, huh? Can you hear me? So your son sounds like the wisest sage
Hang
at
on
a
a
young
second.
age that I
Nope.
ever met.
I still can't hear you.
Oh no. All right, hold on. Let's see. How about now? No? Oh goodness.
Mm-mm.
Um,
I'm sure what you're saying is amazing, but I can't hear it yet.
let me see what I got here. Microphone on. How about now?
Now I can
Yes?
hear. Yeah.
Yeah. I said your son sound like the best sage at a young age.
Yeah, he was. We call him the wizard at Saved by Story for a reason. He like I said, when he was born, he had this like oldness about him that I was going to try to preserve and help him to stay connected to that. And I think story helped me to do that for sure.
Okay, so we've spoken about your story. So you spoke about working with a teacher from The Secret and uncovering unconscious stories that kept you small. Um, what was the biggest realization from that experience? Because I know that you probably have other stories
Mhm.
that you have already went over and you found some type of healing in it. And I know that when we listen to other people's stories, we end up getting a piece of you ends up healing in the process.
Mhm.
So, what was your biggest realization from that experience?
Well, I think it was just the fact that I had never felt safe before. Safe enough to speak the things out loud. I think that was the biggest relief of that space was because, something about it and also there's this funny aspect of safety. When you walk in, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I tell my clients this all the time because when a person or a group of people is really truly safe, what happens to you? Like, it almost feels like all of your defenses disappear, right? And all of
Right.
those um, things that we use, the masks and the persona that we've developed to kind of navigate the world, the stuff that works everywhere else to keep us safe, like suddenly it doesn't work because we're with truly safe people who can kind of see past all of that. And
Right.
so what ends up coming forward very quickly in our spaces is people shadow stuff. They'll say something and just look at me like wide-eyed, like, "Did I just say that
So
out
like
loud?"
this.
Right? Because, like, they would never say that in other places, whether it's a story that they have to tell or a name that they really wanted to call that person, or, something that they are feeling toward me, and they'll just like, just blurts out of their mouth.
Bird
And
vomits.
and for me, I know the feeling, because at my very first, when I went to that training with the teacher from The Secret, I had a moment like that where I remember hearing myself speak and thinking, "What the heck are you saying? Like, why are you saying that in this space?" And I lost control. Like, I couldn't stop it. It was just gonna take over. And by the end of that, hour, I wanted to just like be invisible. I just wanted to never go back, because I felt like there was a part of myself that sneaked out without my permission. And
Listen,
and
that
so,
filter has to come out somehow. It has to
right?
come off eventually, especially like if you don't change them out. I
Yeah.
say that when I don't get sleep, my brain does a little bloop bloop and it just turns off all senses, and it's like, okay, so you're about to get the full sight in here because
Same. Yep.
I'm tired now and I
Yep.
was woken up. So I feel you.
Yeah, yeah, and it's, especially when you're going into spaces to do something that's going to grow you, right? It's a personal development or a professional development space. And all of a sudden you find yourself, you find like you've hit the limit of your story. Like, the story and the identity that has been shaped for me up until this point isn't going to work here. Now what? We have to grow into something more than we are. And oftentimes that means exposing the limits and the shadows that have been driving us before. And so I love that. I wait for that moment in our spaces when people just show up and just start acting super uncomfortable. Not because I want them to feel that way, but because I believe that that's when true healing becomes possible. When people show up as their truer selves, right? Something sneaks out. And if they do that inside of a safe enough place, they can have a different experience, right? Because usually we shove that out because it got us into trouble before.
Mhm.
Usually we shoved it out because we were tortured because we said something like that, or asked that question when we weren't supposed to. Right? We have good reasons for these shadows. We put them we put them in their corners because it wasn't safe to have them out playing and
In the first
making
place.
big messes, right? Because we weren't necessarily in control of those stories when we were little and those identities were being shaped. And so when they get the opportunity to come out and be seen, and the people in the room say, "I see you. Tell me more." Right? Like, we, instead of looking disgusted or um upset or angry or any of the things that we would normally assume would come as a result of saying those things, and people lean in and they say, "Well, that's curious. Tell me more about that." Then all of a sudden, right? Now it's safe. And now we begin the process of kind of rewiring the story of the shadow, because the shadow story is, every time I do this, this happens, right? And so if we can interrupt that every time your shadow shows up and starts to make a mess, instead of, the instant smushing or whatever happened in your world before, we try to create a space where everybody leans in with curiosity and compassion. And so that person immediately has what I think is the beginning of a healing experience. It's like a little portal or threshold that they can cross if they want more of that. And they keep telling their story.
Okay. And I know we talked about having a safe space to do all this stuff. So what role does community play in storytelling? Because I know that how can sharing our stories with others help us heal? I know we talked about the narrative medicine, being able to tell your story unapologetically without fail, but how does community tie in? Because I know that's like you can't be like that with everybody. Like everybody is not ready for full you. Like I used to tell people I work with, I was like, y'all get 25% of cyan. That is all you will ever get. until you
Yeah.
get to know me. But my brother at home, he gets the other 75 and he just looks at me and closes the door and says, "You're silly." And then just locks it because he knows, he's like, "Yep, I'm pretty sure I'm going to see this goofball in the next 30 minutes when we're about to cook dinner." So, yeah. Because I
Mhm.
was like, you can't really say everything you want to say off rip to just about anybody, because you don't know if they're a safe space or a harming
Mhm.
distraction right now. So,
This
what?
is such a good question because I want to answer with yes, absolutely, and actually no. Okay, so the yes, absolutely is, and I tell people this at the beginning of the personal development journey and the beginning of working on their messages, like when you're at the beginning, everything is so tender. It really is very similar to having a baby, right? Like there's this new version of you that you're bringing into the world. You're trying to, I'm going to be a messenger. I'm going to be a healthier, happier human. And so there's this part of you that's like not good at that. Right? It's 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 baby version, and it needs to be taken care of, and it needs to learn how to take care of itself, right? And
Mhm.
so I absolutely 100% advocate for, like, do not step into communities that are not safe and tell your story. That is like one of the worst things you can do. You will re-traumatize yourself and compound that shadow, and you'll walk out feeling like, what has happened to me? I have seen it too many times. I've experienced it too many times. So find yourself the safest place where you can learn how to take that safety that is out there and bring it inside. Because what I have, I have one client who, I have lots of clients who've been through this, but one client, her story is just such a powerful example of this, where she, really safe in her career, top of her game, like changing the world, right? Comes in
Right?
to write this book. And she's the one who, at the very first retreat, blurts the secret out and then looks around the room and just waits for people to bolt, And instead, everyone leans in and she gets real nervous. And so, she has this, like, she didn't feel safe in her own experience with that story. But what happened across time is that that constant leaning in and realizing, like, I can tell this and I'm going to be safe and held. I'm going to tell the little bit more and I'm going to be safe and held, and offered compassion. Like, it creates a level of healing and safety and ownership. Maybe that's the right word. Ownership and responsibility for safety, where then you can take it into the world. And I really think that we just need that time to incubate who we really are and get to the point where we're like, you know what? I might decide, because of my goals in this situation or my goals in that situation, to play at 25%, because these people, I just freaking blow their circuits if I went 100, right? And
Right.
but we make those decisions at that point for the other people, not for ourselves, because we've developed enough safety in ourselves that we can be 100% apologetic and then just let it roll. One of my favorite mentors said, when you've, like, really nailed your message and your alignment with it, when you speak and people run to you and other people run away from you. And I thought, that is the most horrible thing to say to a people pleaser like me, because I want everybody to like me. Like, it's
Oh,
not safe in my world if everyone doesn't like me. That's what I was thinking at the time. But there was something about that I was like, yeah, that would be great, actually, because then I would know if I spoke my 100% truth and people stuck around, then I know those are my people. Everyone else that I'm doing diluting and playing at 25% for, like, I don't really know. Are they safe? I haven't tested them with my 100%. But maybe it's because I had to develop my 100% inside me.
And that type of stuff takes time.
Oh yeah.
And it's not something that you can do because okay, so this is another thing I say. It's like life is trial and error. If you live life just trying to do everything right the first time, obviously you're not going to have much of an interesting life. At least not to my standards, but because I know that part of my life, if I would not have messed up the way I did, I wouldn't have something to giggle about later.
Mhm.
Um, about the people I talk to or like the one people I've dated, and I'm like, why? Like the initial, you get more emotion because like I'm more of a person that's hands and exaggerating. I've explained like stories I've had, and I would just be like, wow. And it's like I'd be so dramatic, and my sister just laughs, and she's like, "What? What is with the theoretical jazz hands?" I was like, "Because you're the only one that I can do this with," and I'm just like, just so I completely understand having that safe space. That's why I asked what about community, how important that is.
Yeah,
But
it's
for
extremely important. I feel
so
like it's the opportunity to um almost reparent ourselves with other people, right? We have the opportunity to say, okay, instead of this family system that had all these dynamics that weren't healthy, I'm choosing a system that has healthier dynamics. I have not found one that's perfect because it's all made of humans, right? On a journey. But,
right,
like, I'm gonna choose this better one, and then I'm gonna figure out how to be in relationship with people in a healthy way, maybe for the first time in my life. Now, I might have figured that out as a therapist or as a coach, or I might have figured that out in as a mom, like, that was my journey figuring out how to have a healthy relationship with another human being, and then I had to, like, take that and, transfer it over to all of my other relationships. But I think that community gives us the ability to learn how to relate to each other in healthier ways again, especially if we have those agreements, those safety agreements for compassion and curiosity and what happens when you say something that just like crushes me. Like, what are the mechanisms that can be in place so that we can learn how to handle these things and stay healthier? And then after we learn those for the first time, we test them out, we wrestle, and we kind of like figure it out in community where everyone is doing the same thing. Then we take those principles out into our other spaces and start to figure out, okay, how is this going to look in the other parts of my world where other people aren't doing this type of work? That's the tricky part. And it takes a very long time because how long did it take us to get here? I mean, these are long these are long chapters we have been living, right? Like, some of my shadows have been at play for a good, like, 40 years now. And so
mm,
why do I walk into spaces expecting that,
things are
transformation
going to
is gonna
change,
happen like that, right?
right? So, what? Okay, so I have two more questions, and then I will let you go. So the first question is a combo. It says, so what are some common story loops to get people stuck, and how can they break free from that? Like, I know we talked about community, we talked about all these things. So how do they get stuck? Because sometimes it's not as easy to get that story out, especially if it's the most painful. How do we even get started, like rewriting these stories?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is give yourself permission to do it really badly. Like, find a safe place, whether that's your journal and your pen that you can, like, burn after it's over, like, right? Like, whatever conditions you need to create to get it out. Whether that's, like I said, you in a journal or you and one person that you absolutely trust that you can begin to talk through it and then get some of the details out and then begin to write it. But, you know, too many of us have this I guess it's just part of our cultural narrative, that it's got to be perfect. We got to figure it out. We got to do it all by ourselves, and we got to do it right the first time. Like, it
Right.
makes no sense with humanity and the way that we grow and develop, but these are the things that we tell ourselves. And then if we get really good and masterful at one thing, and then we step into a space like I have, clinicians and these educators and all of these people who are high performing and so good and masterful in their spaces, and then they step into this space and they're like, oh shoot, I feel like I'm 2 years old. Like, I don't know what to do here. I don't know if I can write that scene like that. Well, you got to at least start. You have to figure out what is it going to take to give yourself permission to be super messy and just be a kid at it, be bad at it first so that you can look at it and go, wow, good job. I got the first draft out and it's not great. Now, somebody help me make this better, right?
Oh
This is just
God.
the natural way that we learn, but it's like so foreign to us. Kids don't have that in their head. They just go and do the thing, right?
Yeah, I guess I've seen my god kids do the thing, and I'm like, what was the thought process when you
There
thought
was
this was
none.
okay? And I was like, I don't know, I just thought it was fun at the time. I'm like, no, smear paint on the wall. No, absolutely not. Just oh god.
Yep.
But
It's true, but we need a little more of that, right? We need a little more of that freedom that we had before we realized like there were rules. Like, what if we could just do it badly and do it inside of a space where everyone went, good job. I mean, that was, the first time and you did it. Like, it's more about doing it than how you're doing it. So I'd say that's the first thing is just find some safety and just do it messy.
okay. So this is the second before I ask you the question of every episode. What
Okay.
does magically ever after look like to you for your
Mm.
story, for your life?
You know, that is such a good question. Magically ever after. It just keeps expanding. I've already, when I think about if you'd asked me this 5 or 10 years ago, it would have been really focused on my son, right? Because he was still at home and that was my priority, like getting him ready to fly. And now he's out there doing it. And so now I'm like, ooh, my next magically ever after is, who do my husband and I get to be? That we weren't necessarily able to be while he was at home, right? Because we were really focusing so much attention on that. So, for me, I think my answer is to be in every part of my life to feel fully alive. That's what I want. I want to feel, you know, connected spiritually. I want to feel connected to all of the people in my life and feel like I'm on purpose, that the way I'm spending my time, the people that I'm hanging out with, it's all meaningful and moving myself and others toward a better ending.
Okay. And um if you could give advice to anyone, oh sorry, any part of you, no matter what space, time, dimension, whatever, if you could give advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I would have told her to never stop questioning, like really to trust her gut because she was right about everything. And she let people tell her that she wasn't.
I love that. Well, Miss Amanda, it is a true gem and blessing to have you on the show. You've explained so much for us and gave us a lot of insight. And I'm hoping we'll see you again next time on a different episode. But we truly do appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. I love the conversation.
No problem. And we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Okay. Sounds great.
Well, ooh, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. That is, again, this is my favorite episode because I've always known about stories and how it impact everything. Like, even as a kid, I noticed that my love for stories, whether it be Disney stories, whether it be books, through film, cartoon, it all had a purpose. And by the way, I will let Amanda know that Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of my faves, and it taught me a lot of meditation and everything. So your son learned from a very wise storyteller. But this is one of the things that I preach to you guys all day long. Storytelling, not storytelling, let me run that back. Your story, your mess ups, your, excuse my French, your fuck ups, your oops, I fell down the stairs and I did not see the stairs moments are what make you you. And they're also what makes your healing the most unique, because nobody can heal you but you. You can have specialists, you can have all these people tell you what you should do, but in actuality, you are the writer to your story. You hold the narrative. And when you grasp that and get to the root of it, your shadows don't look that bad at all. They're actually your badges of honor to show that you actually lived. And then when we actually digest that and look at it from that point of view, we start to see our lives grow and stitch into something of a great tapestry. And I hope that Miss Amanda has helped you in a way to how to get started, and then more importantly, how to stay in that mode. But we cannot stay on here forever. As much as I would love to hit the hour, she has things to do, I have things to do. So this is where we cut it off here. Thank you so much for tuning in to Shadow Corner. Next time we will have on another guest. I will keep their name a secret, but just know that there's not just one way to skin a cat when it comes to getting to the root of things. So, and I'll leave it there. So just like that, guys, I'll see you next time.